Good morning. It's a great honor to be here today, and it's wonderful to see you all. It really is. Ronald Coase was a beloved friend. I follow Alexander with some personal remembrances about conversations we've had over the years. The conversations were always delightful, covering many topics. I'll limit myself here to talking about issues of status, humor, and his optimism. Let's talk first about status. Ronald was not moved by status symbols. Let me give you an example. On the 14th of October, 1991, many economists were up early. What were they up early for? That was the morning the Nobel Prize called about the winner for the economic prize. Their anxiety was understandable. They called Ronald Coase in the south of France, and no one answered. The announcement was made to the world. Then several days went by, and still no contact. What had happened? Ronald and Marion had decided to travel to Tunisia for a vacation in October that year. They told no one about this except the concierge in their condo in the south of France. Now, Ronald knew he was on the short list for the Nobel Prize for several years, but obviously had not given any thought to that prize. Finally, after several days, an AP reporter went to the condo, talked to the concierge, and the concierge says they'd gone to Tunisia, but I don't know where. So the enterprising reporter started calling every hotel in Tunisia, asking for Coase. Finally, he got the right hotel and got Ronald on the phone. At that time, Marion was with him, and Marion looked at Ronald and she said the following: "Ronald, you look like you have just won the Nobel Prize." To which he said, "I have." Among all the Nobel Prize winners, apparently, Ronald was the most difficult to track down. He wasn't making a political statement. He simply did not think about it. The prize had not, and in the process, had not really engaged his interest. He was focused on having fun with Marion in Tunisia. A brief story. Ronald and Marion received an invitation to have dinner with the Queen. They talked it over, and they decided it was a long way to go to dinner from Chicago to London. Now, such invitations from the Queen are often a prelude to being knighted. So one of the reasons we don't have Sir Ronald is that it was a long way to go to dinner. Alexander's mentioned and Mary mentioned about the formation of the Coase Institute. Coase was very reluctant to have the institute named after himself. It took much persuasion from Mary and from Alexandra to get him to finally say yes. I could go on. You get the point. Coase was not moved by approval or symbols of approval of this or that group. He wanted to understand how things worked. He was remarkably independent. Now let me shift to another topic, humor. As Alexander said, Ronald had a quick wit. I have a theory, not really testable, but I have a theory that part of his long life was a result of his wit. Let me give you some examples. We're here in Washington, where the Federal Communications Commission is located. After Ronald published the FCC paper on the advantages of privatization of the airways, radio spectrum, rather than having FCC do things by fiat, he was called to Washington to testify. There, at the hearing, his proposal was publicly ridiculed by the head of the FCC, among other groups. So I spoke to Coase about this, and I asked him the following question. I said, "Ronald, if they thought the proposal was absurd, why did they invite you?" And he said the following: everyone makes mistakes. I was a faculty member at Washington University, and Ronald came down several times to visit and to give talks and so forth. And during these meetings, we would sometimes have undergraduates ask questions, and thank God for undergraduates, because they ask questions others don't. One undergraduate asked Ronald, he said, "How big should the government be?" Coase replied, "It's difficult to say precisely. But let me illustrate. If you were a physician and one of your patients came in and that patient weighed 400 pounds and the patient said, 'How much should I weigh?' the answer should be less." Let me talk about colleagues and some of his insights there. Ronald knew many of the leading economists of the 20th century. One of his colleagues at the London School of Economics was Abba Lerner. Ronald said Abba was the smartest guy in his class. He was a very interesting and brilliant economist. In the 1930s, Abba Lerner was an advocate for something called market socialism. Abba had a plan to make socialism work. So Ronald tells the following story. In 1938, Abba Lerner drove his Model T Ford from Berkeley, California to Mexico City, 2,000 miles on the Model T. Why was he going to Mexico City? He wanted to talk to Leon Trotsky. Now let me pause here just a second. For the younger members, as a teacher, for the younger members of the audience, Leon Trotsky was not a rock star, okay? Leon Trotsky was one of the leaders with Lenin to the Russian Revolution in 1917. What was Leon Trotsky doing in Mexico City? Well, he was trying to avoid Joseph Stalin and survive. Alas, he did not. So let me go back to the story. So Ronald tells his story, and I thought, wow, oh my God, wow. Abba Lerner and Leon Trotsky. What did Abba Lerner say when he came back from talking to Leon Trotsky? And Ronald said, "I'm sorry, I don't remember what Abba said, alas. But," Ronald said, "I know what Abba Lerner told Leon Trotsky." Abba would have said, "Leon, you can make communism work if you set price equal to marginal cost." It's probably true, by the way. Now, Ronald did in his arguments and his presentations often use reductio ad absurdum arguments or humor. It did not always go down well. It was not always understood. So in 1974, Ronald wrote a paper on the market for goods and the market for ideas in the American Economic Review, and then there was follow-up discussion in Time magazine. In that discussion, Ronald made the following assertion, quote, "It is easier for people to discover they have a bad can of peaches than it is for them to discover they have a bad idea." Let me repeat, okay? It is easier for people to discover they have a bad can of peaches than it is for them to discover they have a bad idea. His point was, at that time, in 1974, that the case for regulating many goods was weak. If people believed in freedom of speech, and many people did at that time, they should want less regulation of goods. If you do not regulate speech, then why are you so exercised about regulating peaches? I'm repeating myself here. Of course, Coase's view was that that with more bad ideas than bad peaches, then the peach regulation should be reduced. Today, as if Coase were discussing this today, unfortunately, there are many university campuses which argue against free speech. Free speech might upset students, so the argument goes. Of course, Coase did not like the idea of regulating either speech or speeches. But at least today, he would be in agreement that academics are at least consistent in regulating both. Okay, optimism. Coase was optimistic. He was skeptical about the economist arguments about rationality and utility maximization. He thought individuals and groups were sometimes foolish. He also thought the laws of economic supply. So he said the following: the greater the price you have to pay for being foolish, the less you do. And I think he's right there. He was a follower of Frank Knight in this regard. One of the reasons for his skepticism about a lot of the standard economic arguments was his own life experience. He was born in 1910, in December of 1910. That was the month that Virginia, I'll skip that. In any case, he was born in 1910. During World War I, his father fought in the Kurdish region of the Ottoman Empire. He saw the rise and fall of the Nazi regime, the rise and fall of communism. He lived through the Depression. He lived through World War II and the Blitz. Alexander's talked about some of that. There's more. During his career, his work was largely ignored for considerable periods of time. It was ridiculed in some points and misinterpreted. The 37 paper really didn't get picked up until decades later. The social cost paper was largely misinterpreted for a long time. I asked him about this. He did not seem greatly troubled to have been out of fashion. He said, the time has to be right for an idea. People need to be ready for the idea. He took the long view. He believed that good ideas went out. He remained optimistic. Talk about another topic briefly. I'll call it magic. Coase changed the way we see the world. He did it through his empirical work, through deduction, through inductive reasoning, through hard work, but there was something more. It was an insight with more than just logic and evidence. There was a curiosity and intuition. I call it magic. Now, in support of this argument, I call on another authority. In 1918, Einstein talked about the remarkable developments in physics. And about that he said, there is no logical path to these laws. They're intuitions, they're jumps. Obviously, Einstein had it. And Coase, in childlike in his view of the world, ability to ask the right question, there was some magic there. In conclusion, Ronald Coase enjoyed talking with other economists, but he enjoyed more talking with young scholars. He always made inquiries about how they were doing, about their research. He was very proud of the fact that we have scholars from the Institute from 69 countries now. He saw in them as the hope for the future. He did so until his very last days. Ronald Coase's model lifts us all. A seeker of truth rather than a supporter of some position. An optimist who changed our view of the world. A man who made magic. Thank you, Ronald, for all you have done.